Under the bright lights of a crowded press room, cameras flash, microphones crowd the table, and tension fills the air. On one side sits the reigning UFC champion, muscles tight, ego even tighter. He's known for his brutal knockouts, his arrogance, and his refusal to show respect to anyone he doesn't consider a real fighter. Across from him sits JakePaul, calm, confident, silent. No trash talk, no smirk, just focus. The reporters begin firing questions. "Jake, do you really think you can beat a world-class MMA fighter?" Before Jake can even answer, the champion laughs. "This guy, please, he's a YouTuber with gloves. I'll finish him in under one round." The crowd erupts in laughter. The UFC champ leans back, shaking his head like the fight's already over. But Jake doesn't bite. He simply replies, "I've heard that before." For a brief second, the room falls silent. The champion frowns. That quiet confidence hits differently. Reporters rush in with more questions. Cameras zoom in on Jake's calm face. He's not there to entertain. He's there to prove something. Outside the press room, social media explodes. Clips of the champion's arrogance go viral. Fans laugh. Critics mock JakePaul. Comment sections fill up with one question: is Jake crazy for taking this fight? But behind the noise, Jake trains in silence. He's been through humiliation before, and he's learned that revenge tastes best when it's earned in the ring. The UFC champ, on the other hand, is too busy celebrating early. He posts memes, makes jokes in interviews, calls Jake the YouTube clown. Every word fuels Jake's motivation. The fight is set. The world is watching, and as Jake wraps his hands that night, he whispers to himself, they'll stop laughing soon. No one, not even Jake's own fans, could have imagined how fast the tables would turn once the bell rang. The internet had chosen its sides. On one end were loyal UFC fans, millions of them, who saw the fight as a joke. JakePaul? Against a world champion? He's going to get destroyed. On the other side, a growing army of JakePaul supporters who had seen this story before. They remembered every boxer who laughed at him, until they were the ones lying on the canvas. Still, the noise was deafening. Every sports show, every podcast, every headline called it the most ridiculous fight of the year. The UFC champion leaned into it. He thrived on attention. Arrogance wasn't a mask for him, it was fuel. He began uploading daily videos from his gym. Shadowboxing, flexing, laughing. "I'll show the world what happens when a real fighter steps into the ring with a YouTube clown," he said into the camera, his smirk never fading. His followers roared with approval. Comments flooded in. "End this influencer hype train. Please knock him out cold in 30 seconds. Meanwhile, JakePaul stayed mostly silent. He wasn't giving interviews. He wasn't posting training clips. He wasn't talking. He was working. Behind closed doors, Jake's team had turned their camp into a fortress. Phones were banned. Cameras too. Every day started before sunrise. Roadwork, sparring, conditioning. Brutal rounds that tested his willpower. Jake wasn't fighting for views anymore. He was fighting for validation. His coach told him, "He's faster, stronger, more experienced, but he's overconfident. That's your opening. Stay patient." The contrast was striking. The UFC champ trained surrounded by hype men, music, and constant media coverage. Jake trained in silence, just sweat, pain, and purpose. Weeks before the fight, they met again at the official press conference. The room was packed. Fans screamed both names. Jake walked in wearing a black hoodie, eyes locked forward, unfazed by the chaos. The UFC champ leaned back in his chair, grinning. The moderator asked, "Any final words before fight night?" The champion leaned toward the mic. "Yeah, JakePaul is getting exposed. I'll make sure he remembers this night every time he looks in the mirror." Jake waited a moment, then calmly replied, "We'll see whose mirror breaks first." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Clips hit Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube within minutes, racking up millions of views. Sports pages called it the battle of ego versus discipline. The UFC champ doubled down online, mocking Jake's voice, his past, even his family. Jake never responded, but his silence was louder than any insult. Then came the weigh-in. Both men stripped down, face to face. The tension was so thick you could feel it through the screen. The UFC champ pushed Jake hard. Jake didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared. That one stare sent chills through the arena. For the first time, the champion blinked. The crowd noticed it. The fans online noticed it. Maybe, just maybe, Jake Paul wasn't as easy as he looked. Fight week arrived. Vegas was buzzing. Posters plastered across hotels, casinos, and billboards. Tickets sold out in hours. Every sports network broadcasted predictions. Round 1 KO, said most experts, in favor of the UFC champ. Jake doesn't have the power or experience, they claimed. But a few quiet voices disagreed. One analyst said something that stuck with viewers. Confidence wins headlines. Discipline wins fights. Meanwhile, Jake's final message before the fight appeared on his Instagram story. Just 2 words. No caption. No emojis. Stay tuned. That night, fans from around the world tuned in. Some hoping to see Jake crushed. Others secretly rooting for the underdog. Millions of eyes locked on the screen, waiting for one man to fall. The stage was set. The trash talk was over. And the real test was only a few hours away. Jake sat quietly in the locker room, gloves on his lap, head bowed in prayer. Across the arena, the UFC champ laughed with his crew, already rehearsing his victory speech. But destiny doesn't care about speeches. It listens to sweat, and Jake had been sweating in silence for months. Who do you think would win, a UFC champion or Jake Paul? Comment below and tell me which country or city you're watching from. Both men were ready, but only one truly understood what was coming next. The cameras may have gone silent, but inside Jake Paul's private gym, the war had already begun. It wasn't against the UFC champion, not yet. It was against himself. Every morning at 5 a.m., before the sun even hinted at rising, Jake was already lacing up his shoes. Cold air filled the streets of Puerto Rico as he ran through empty roads, sweat dripping, mind locked in. The only sound was his breath. Controlled, steady, unbreakable. This was no longer about fame. It wasn't about YouTube views or headlines. It was about respect. Jake knew the world still saw him as the influencer who boxed for clicks. But this fight, this one, was his chance to erase that label forever. Inside the gym, his coach BJ Flores pushed him to the edge every single day. Again, tighter stance. Reset your guard. Every punch echoed like thunder against the heavy bag. Jake's knuckles bruised, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. He was learning the discipline that arrogance could never survive. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the UFC champion's camp was more like a circus. Music blared, cameras rolled, and reporters filled the gym. The champion laughed, showboated, flexed between rounds. He told the cameras, "This fight's already over. Jake's gonna fold the moment I touch him." His team laughed with him, all except one quiet coach in the corner who whispered, "He's not taking this seriously. That kid's training like a monster." But no one listened. The champion's confidence had turned into blindness. Back in Jake's camp, the grind only intensified. Sparring partners rotated in and out, bigger, stronger, faster, yet none could break his rhythm. He was getting sharper, more calculated. The loud, brash problem child was gone. In his place stood a composed, dangerous fighter who had learned patience. His brother Logan dropped by to visit and was stunned by what he saw. "Bro, you're different," he said. Jake smiled, sweat dripping down his face. That's the point. Each day was a test of will, focus, and silence. No media, no ego, no excuses. He started studying the UFC champion's footage late at night, frame by frame, watching his patterns, his habits, his overconfidence. He drops his left every time he throws a right hook, Jake muttered one night. He rewound the clip again. That's my window. He wasn't training to survive the fight. He was training to end it. 1 week before the fight, a storm hit the island. Most gyms closed. Electricity flickered. Jake still trained, and by flashlight, shadowboxing in the dark. His coach looked at him and said quietly, "Most people break when no one's watching." Jake replied, "That's when champions are made." The UFC champion, meanwhile, was everywhere. Podcasts, talk shows, late-night interviews. He laughed at Jake's silence. "The kid's scared. Notice how quiet he's been? He doesn't even believe in himself." Reporters nodded. Headlines agreed. But behind the scenes, Jake was sharpening his weapon to focus, and then came the open workout day. Hundreds of cameras pointed at both fighters. The UFC champion entered the ring, bouncing, full of swagger, joking with fans. Jake walked in after him, hoodie up, eyes locked straight ahead. He didn't speak a single word. Every jab he threw looked heavy, precise, controlled. Each one echoed through the gym like a promise. When he finished, reporters crowded him. "Jake, what's your prediction?" He smiled slightly and said, "He's going to meet a version of me he's never seen before." The crowd fell silent. Even the UFC champion's grin faded for a moment. Back in the locker room, Jake looked at his reflection in the mirror. Not the YouTuber. Not the meme. Just a fighter. Scarred hands, bruised eyes, calm heart, he whispered to himself. "I don't fight for approval anymore. I fight to prove I belong." That night, as he walked out of the gym, one of his trainers asked, "You nervous?" Jake replied softly, "No, he should be, because arrogance might talk loud, but discipline echoes longer." If you were Jake, grinding every day while the world laughed at you, would you keep going or quit? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every one of them. The day had finally come. The arena lights, the crowd, the pressure, and the silence before the storm that changed everything. The night air outside the T-Mobile Arena buzzed like electricity. Floodlights sliced through the Vegas skyline as thousands of fans poured in, chanting, arguing, holding signs that split the crowd in half. One side screamed, "UFC Champ by KO." The other roared, "JakePaul all the way." Inside, the energy was chaos. Flashing lights, celebrity faces, camera crews rushing through the tunnel. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a spectacle. JakePaul stood quietly in the locker room, hands wrapped tight, eyes closed. The muffled roar of the crowd echoed through the concrete walls. His coach adjusted his gloves. "This is it, Jake. You ready to prove them wrong?" Jake took a slow breath. "I'm not proving them wrong," he said calmly. "I'm proving myself right." Meanwhile, down the hall, the UFC champion's locker room was loud. Music blasting, team members laughing, cameras rolling for a last-minute promo. He shadowboxed in front of the mirror, smirking. "I'm gonna embarrass this kid," he said, flexing. "First round knockout. Easy work." His trainer tried to get him to focus, but he waved him off. "Relax, it's JakePaul. I fought killers. He's a YouTuber." The arrogance was leaking out of every word. As the undercard fights ended, the tension reached its peak. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the main event of the evening." The crowd erupted. Lights dimmed. Smoke filled the entrance tunnel. A beat dropped. Jake's walkout song hit the speakers. He emerged, hood up, eyes laser-focused. No dancing, no smiles, just silence and determination. Each step toward the ring echoed like a drumbeat of destiny. Commentators whispered into their mics. "Look at Jake, dead serious. He's not playing tonight." Fans noticed the difference too. He looked like a man on a mission. Then came the champion's entrance. A full light show. Pyro blasting. The crowd went wild. He strutted to the ring like a king entering his palace, grinning at cameras, blowing kisses, showing off his belt. He pointed at Jake from across the ring. "You don't belong here, boy," he shouted. Jake didn't react. He just stared, calm, unreadable. In the center of the ring, the referee called them in for instructions. Their gloves touched barely. The champion smirked. "You ready to go viral again, YouTube boy?" Jake leaned in just slightly and whispered, "You'll find out in the first round." The referee stepped back. The crowd went silent. Ding, ding, ding. Round one began. The UFC champion exploded forward, throwing heavy shots right away. Wild, powerful, reckless. Jake stayed on defense, slipping, moving, reading. The first minute was chaos where the crowd roared with every swing. Commentators yelled. The champ's putting the pressure on early. But Jake's eyes were calm, focused. Watching for that one mistake, the champion kept taunting between punches. "Is that all you got?" Then, in the corner, he dropped his left hand, exactly like Jake had studied for weeks. Jake stepped in. A sharp jab, then a right hand, clean, explosive, straight down the middle. Boom! The sound cracked through the arena. The champion's head snapped back and he stumbled. The crowd gasped. Jake didn't rush. He didn't chase. He just smiled slightly, eyes locked in. The champion's grin was gone. For the first time, doubt flashed across his face. The round continued, but everything had changed. Jake's confidence grew. Every movement was sharp, controlled. The champion's punches grew slower, sloppier. Jake began to dictate the rhythm. Jabs, feints, angles. He wasn't fighting like an influencer anymore. He was fighting like a professional boxer who had done his homework. The bell rang. End of round one. Jake walked calmly to his corner, breathing steady. The champion sat down, chest heaving, trying to laugh it off. But his eyes said something different. He'd felt the power. He'd felt the truth. The crowd erupted into debate. Half screamed, "Jake got lucky." The other half shouted, "No! He's the real deal." Commentators couldn't stop talking about that right hand replaying in slow motion across every screen. He caught him clean. That was no fluke. You can see the shock on the champ's face. Back in Jake's corner, his coach leaned in. "He's rattled. Don't chase the knockout. Stay sharp. Let him make the next mistake." Jake nodded, never breaking his stare across the ring. The UFC champion slammed his gloves together, trying to psych himself back up. But deep down he knew the kid wasn't what he thought. If you were in Jake's shoes when fighting someone who disrespected you in front of the world, would you stay calm or go for revenge in round 2? Drop your answer in the comments below. The second round began, and what happened next made the entire arena stand on its feet. The crowd was still buzzing from that right hand as the fighter stood up for round 2. The UFC champion shook his arms, pretending to laugh it off, but his eyes betrayed him. A flicker of doubt. A moment of fear. Across the ring, Jake stood silent, eyes fixed. No smile, no words, just focus. Ding. Round 2 began. The champion tried to reclaim control, charging forward again. Heavy shots, wide swings, forcing Jake toward the ropes. Each punch cut through the air like thunder, but Jake's defense was water. Flowing, slipping, calm. He wasn't fighting with emotion. He was fighting with patience. "Breathe, Jake," his coach yelled. "Make him miss, then make him pay." And he did. Each time the champion lunged, Jake slid just out of reach, countering with crisp jabs that snapped the champion's head back. The crowd started to notice. "Wait a second," someone shouted. "Jake's picking him apart." Commentators echoed the same thought. JakePaul's composure is unbelievable. He's fighting like a veteran. 2 minutes in. The champion was breathing heavier now, sweat flying off his gloves. His mouth was open, his punches slower. He swung big again in a looping overhand right. Jake slipped under it perfectly and countered with a sharp uppercut. Crack. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The champion stumbled backward, his legs wobbling. The crowd exploded. Jake didn't rush. He stalked forward, one cold, calculating. Every movement screamed control. The champion tried to clinch, desperate to buy time, but Jake shoved him off. Another jab. Another right hand. Precision, power, purpose. Oh! Another clean shot by JakePaul. The commentator shouted. The UFC champion's arrogance was gone, replaced by panic. His face reddened, his steps unsure. He'd never imagined he'd be in trouble. This early, then came the moment no one saw coming. The champion faked a jab and threw a wild left hook. Jake read it perfectly. He pivoted, loaded up, and unleashed a lightning-fast right cross. Boom! The glove landed flush on the jaw. The champion's eyes rolled back as his body crashed to the canvas. Down goes the champion. The crowd erupted in chaos. Screams, gasps, phones flying into the air, recording every second. Jake stepped back, staring down at the man who mocked him for weeks. He didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He just stood still, breathing, steady, composed. The referee began the count. 1, 2, 3. The champion tried to rise, his legs trembling. He made it to his knees, but his eyes were glazed. He looked across the ring and saw Jake. Calm, cold, confident. He shook his head. He knew. 6, 7, 8. The ref looked into his eyes and waved his hands. It's over. The arena exploded. JakePaul had just knocked out a world-class UFC champion. In the second round, Jake's corner rushed in, hugging him, shouting in disbelief. His coach yelled, "You did it, Jake! You actually did it." Jake's expression barely changed. He just nodded, looking across the ring as medics checked the champion. Then he whispered, "Respect." Because that was what this fight was about. Not fame, not revenge. Respect. The crowd was still roaring when the interviewer entered the ring. Jake took the mic, still breathing hard. "You know," he said, "for years they said I was just a YouTuber, a joke, a wannabe." He paused as the crowd cheered louder, but I kept working. I kept believing. And tonight, discipline beat arrogance. The arena went wild. Fans chanted his name. Even some of the UFC champ's supporters stood and clapped. Across the ring, the fallen champion finally stood up, humbled and quiet. He walked over to Jake and extended his glove. Jake accepted it without hesitation. "You got me," the champion said quietly. Jake nodded. Respect, brother. It's not personal. And in that moment, under the lights, surrounded by thousands, a loudmouthed YouTuber had transformed into a fighter the world could no longer ignore. Commentators summed it up best. He said he'd ended in the first round. But he didn't realize it'd be him on the canvas. If you were JakePaul standing over the man who mocked you, would you celebrate or stay humble like he did? Drop your answer below. I'm reading all your comments. But the story didn't end there, because what happened after the fight shocked everyone, including Jake himself. The noise in the arena was deafening. Flashes from cameras painted the ring in white bursts of light. JakePaul stood in the center, gloves hanging by his sides, chest rising and falling slowly. The fight was over. But the silence that followed carried more weight than any punch. Across the ring, the UFC champion sat on a stool, his head bowed. His cornerman spoke quietly, wrapping a towel around his shoulders. Moments ago, he'd been the loudest man in the room. Now he was silent, humbled, human. Jake glanced at him, then turned away from the cameras, letting the other man have his dignity. He wasn't there to humiliate. He was there to prove something bigger. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, by knockout in the second round, Jake the problem child Paul. The crowd exploded into cheers. Jake's team jumped, hugged, screamed his name. Logan Paul climbed into the ring shouting, "You did it, bro. You actually did it." Jake cracked a faint smile, but his eyes stayed calm, focused. He wasn't celebrating like a man who'd won a fight. He was reflecting like a man who'd earned respect. In the locker room afterward, reporters swarmed the hallway. Microphones, cameras, questions all flooding toward Jake. "Jake, was this personal? Did you expect to finish it that early? What do you say to people who doubted you?" Jake wiped his face with a towel, looked into the cameras, and said quietly, "I didn't come here to prove I'm better than anyone. I came here to prove I belong." Then he added, "People confuse confidence with arrogance. Tonight, discipline spoke louder than words." That one line, "Discipline spoke louder than words," went viral instantly. Within hours, clips of the knockout flooded social media. JakePaul KO. Respect. Jake under discipline over arrogance. Millions watched the replay. The perfect counterpunch. The slow fall. The stunned silence that followed. YouTubers reacted. Boxers tweeted. Even MMA legends weighed in. "That boy earned it tonight," one UFC veteran posted. "I didn't believe before, but now I do," wrote another. Even Jake's critics couldn't deny what they saw. And then, something unexpected happened. The next morning, the UFC champion posted a video. No music, no editing. Just him, bruised, swollen, sitting in his gym. "I was wrong," he said. "I disrespected a man who worked harder than I realized. JakePaul beat me fair and square." He paused, then added, "I let my ego talk. But that man earned my respect. And I hope every young fighter watching learns what happens when you underestimate someone hungry." That video hit 20 million views in a day. And for the first time, the internet wasn't laughing. It was inspired. Jake woke up to thousands of messages, fans, fighters, even old rivals. Everyone saying the same thing. "You earned it." He scrolled through his phone, seeing memes, highlight edits, reaction clips. But the one that hit him hardest was a video from a young boy shadowboxing in his backyard. Captioned, "If Jake can do it, I can too." Jake smiled quietly and whispered, "That's why I fight." Later that week, he appeared on a talk show. The host greeted him with applause and said, "You shocked the world, Jake. How does it feel?" Jake leaned forward, still calm, still humble. "It feels like the start," he said, "because winning isn't about proving haters wrong. It's about proving yourself right every day in silence." The crowd clapped. Even those who once mocked him were now listening, really listening. That night, as he sat alone in his hotel balcony overlooking the Vegas skyline, Jake reflected on everything. The hate, the mockery, the grind, the silence, and the punch that changed everything. He whispered softly, "They'll forget the words, but they'll remember the discipline." He looked at his bruised knuckles and smiled. He knew he hadn't just won a fight. He'd earned respect. If someone once doubted you, would you rather clap back with words or prove them wrong with results like Jake did? Comment below. I'm checking your thoughts. But the story didn't end in the ring, because what Jake did after the fight turned his victory into a global movement. Days after the fight, the world still couldn't stop talking about it. Clips of the knockout had flooded every platform. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Even news outlets that once mocked Jake were now running headlines like, "JakePaul silences doubters with brutal second-round KO." But for Jake, the noise didn't matter anymore. The real victory had already happened inside himself. He returned home to Puerto Rico, the same gym, the same grind. No celebrations, no ego. Just another day, another round of shadowboxing under the sunrise. His coach watched him quietly and said, "You know, most people would be out partying right now." Jake smiled faintly. "That's why I'm not most people." A week later, Jake posted a video, not a flashy montage or a highlight reel. Just him, sitting in the gym, hands still bruised, speaking directly to the camera. "This fight wasn't about fame," he began. "It was about proving that discipline beats arrogance every time." He paused for a moment. "If you've ever been laughed at, underestimated, or told you'll never make it, remember, they only laugh because they're scared of what you might become." His words hit different. Raw, honest, real. The video exploded. Tens of millions watched. Thousands commented stories of how they'd been doubted, mocked, ignored, but now felt inspired to keep fighting for their own goals. Across the internet, hashtags began trending again. Respect over ego, young discipline wins. JakePaul mindset. Jake's story had turned from entertainment into motivation. Even the UFC champion, and now fully recovered, reposted Jake's video with the caption, "Humility learned the hard way." Respect, champ. It was the closure no one expected. Two men who once stood as rivals now stood for something bigger: mutual respect. Weeks later, Jake was invited to speak at a youth sports event. Thousands of young athletes filled the arena. He walked onto the stage, no entourage, no flash, just a microphone in hand. "You don't have to be born great," he said. "You just have to work when no one's watching. The world will see you later." The crowd rose to its feet, clapping, cheering, some even in tears. Jake's journey, from internet controversy to global respect, had come full circle. That night, as he left the arena, his brother asked, "So what's next?" Jake looked up at the stars and said, "I'm not chasing fame anymore. I'm chasing legacy." Because in the end, it wasn't about money or headlines. It was about earning respect the right way. Not through noise, but through action. He turned to the camera one last time and said, "If you believe in working hard, staying humble, and proving yourself through action, type respect in the comments." And just like that, a viral story became a timeless message. Discipline defeats arrogance every single time. If you've ever been underestimated, this story's for you. Drop a or type respect below if you believe real strength comes from humility.